me get Dr. Bagai on this before I get Georgie and Professor Nalapat back in. Dr. Bagai, now we've witnessed some ironies over the past few years, which have suddenly come to our knowledge. It came to our knowledge how many people in Ukraine and all sorts of places who have gone there to study medicine. As we speak, in the UK, they're worrying about, Indian nurses are worrying about their jobs. So you have a lot of trained capacity, human resource that wants to study medicine. Okay, you can argue that some of them will qualify, so all of them will not. But a lot of it, of course, then who seeks opportunity in the Gulf, seeks opportunity in Europe, seeks opportunity. 20% of the NHS is staffed by Indians. So what have we learned from all of this?
Yeah, first and foremost, I must send a huge e-hug to Pratim Bose online because he's touched something which is dearest to my heart. I didn't have time in the first segment to highlight it, but very quickly. So there are two aspects of my e-hug. The first is the aspect of medical education, and the second is building the infrastructure. With regards to medical education, yes, I mentioned in the first time around that we have doubled the number of MBBS seats and MD/MS seats. We've doubled the number of medical colleges, yes. But having said that, we need a more rational distribution of medical colleges pan-India. At the present moment, the medical colleges, almost 65% are down south, which caters to 35% of the population, and the reverse in north. So I think we need a more equitable distribution of medical colleges. The cost of medical education has to come down. With regards to the medical delivery system, 70% of Indian healthcare is private and 30% is government. I think that inequality has to be evened out, and the private healthcare irrational overpricing has to be controlled. I've said this for the last 5 years. The overpricing of private healthcare is becoming unaffordable for a large majority of even affluent Indians.
Okay, so just give me a second because I want to touch upon this, and it's obviously a separate conversation I'll have with you. Ladies and gentlemen, what's gone wrong with medical pricing in America? The reason is because you'd think insurance is a good thing, all of us should take medical insurance. But the hospitals start thinking that, look, anyway the patient is not paying for it, the insurance company has to pay for it. The insurance company likes to negotiate. So let me then charge 10,000 for what costs 2,000 rupees because the insurance company will then settle for 6,000. Okay. And if you take this in extremis, suddenly a simple thing like just a normal blood test can start costing $5,000-6,000. It's becoming ridiculous. So, so there are positives that come out and negatives come out. Finish your point, Dr. Bagai, then I want to get Professor Nalapat back in.
Yeah, so I think with regards to the second aspect of this is with the healthcare delivery, there has to be a bandwidth. At the present moment, it is arbitrarily, it is discretionary, it is working in silos. There are about 6 or 7 large hospital chains which have a stranglehold on Indian healthcare. I think that needs to break. And I'm absolutely sure Mr. Modi being an astute leader, he senses this. As a human being, he could do as much as he could in the last 5 years, but I think he is going to touch on this going forward post-COVID.
Massive boom industry. And if anything we've learned is that all the kids who want to study and then are able to give the exams and qualify to be doctors or nurses should have the opportunity here. They shouldn't have to go to China, to Ukraine, to pursue their education and hope that degrees can apply here. But let me not dodge away from the big ticket item, and let me get Professor Nalapat here. Professor Nalapat, the biggest scandal of the moment is our ability to conduct free and fair examinations. It's fundamentally crucial to the meritocracy of this country. In a country which can do 630 million votes electronically, why are we struggling still so much with examination? That controversy, fixing charges are still being put on exams.
Rishabh, there needs to be exemplary punishment for the entire chain that is responsible for, if it takes place, fixing examinations. Now, you saw a day or two ago, something that is statistically incredible. Students from a particular center, a large number of them scoring perfect marks. That is statistically not just improbable, it's virtually impossible. Now, there has to be something there, and there has to be a payback in terms of punishment and in terms of accountability. You have to make an example of the people who are playing with the futures of hundreds and tens of millions of our youth, because the youth will not tolerate it, I can tell you. And thank God for social media, now these things come out. These things are coming out, and as a consequence, those who are guilty will be I'm sure, held accountable. So yes, I agree with you. So far as the education system is concerned, look at the South. You're talking about the South, and Dr. Bhagai also, having a lot of hospitals, etc. The point was, you look at the graph of women's education, look at the graph of gender justice, and you will find that those locations anywhere in India where you've got high women's education, high gender justice, you have got a better nutrition and a demand for better education.
Yes.
And of course, I'd like to add that just because it's in the South, it doesn't mean that people from other states are barred. I mean, Manipal, for example, I would say about half the students come from the Hindi belt, if not more. So the students from all over the country come there. But the reality is, quite frankly, look at, for example, I'd like to flag one issue. Pharmaceuticals. One of the problems, Dr. Bagai, is that pharmaceutical companies in the US run the hospital system. They run the healthcare system. And they keep raising prices. And we are seeing examples of evergreening of patents. If you give a fixed target that you've got to have so many more patents, then the temptation among some people will be to keep evergreening patents by large pharma groups, mostly situated abroad. And with the result that the generic industry in India will suffer. That kind of evergreening is also, if I may say so.
Okay. So for people watching the broadcast, there is something called Jan Aushadhi. It's not a new invention of Narendra Modi, but Narendra Modi has taken it to the next level. He's leveled it up, in the last 5 years. These are chemist shops that are authorized by governments, by the government of the state, to sell the generic drug, which is generally 1/4 of the cost of the branded drugs. So if you go to a doctor, people like Dr. Bagai, ask them to tell you what the generic formula name is rather than a particular medicine name, because the Jan Aushadhi Kendras have the same thing for 1/4 the price, because the courts in India have allowed that for the people of the country, certain medicines can be made in generic drugs. But let me get George Kurian in on the big issue. George Kurian, in the end, we have to crack this. I mean, we have reached an ironical situation, sir, that a person who qualifies to be an IPSC, a UPSC exam officer, who qualifies to serve, finds it more lucrative not to take up government appointment, but taking his exam results and open a center to teach other further aspirants and makes crores per month. And then the people spending the crores per month are expecting guaranteed results, and that is causing fixing in the system. Meritocracy suffers when we can't trust our exams. What do we do?
Well, Rishabh, this is something that is alarming, and Rahul Gandhi also has tweeted about the NEET papers getting manipulated, and paper leaks are a big concern as it's playing with the future of the youth of this nation. And we strongly believe that there has to be a stop to all these things, and has to be investigated for the larger interest of the people at large, and especially the youth, because with the youth comes building up of the nation, and that's how the future holds for the country. Having said that, I strongly believe that Dr. Bagai, or for that matter Professor Nalapat, has flagged a few things with respect to medical institutions and the respective things. So it's also questioning the Modi-led government for the last 10 years. They may not have, the Modi government may not have been living up to the expectations. So I'm happy that they have raised these issues, and I'm sure that
I'm hoping no government lives up to its expectations, primarily because our expectations keep rising. You've learned the lesson, ladies and gentlemen, in politics, and that's how human progress is. If you are working somewhere and you're earning a salary and you get a promotion, next year you're expecting more. Your base has increased. So once you get a house and a moped and get electricity connection, these are your rights. That's not a government doing you a favor. It's been the failure of 70 years for the government not to be able to provide that to you, because people in the end up paying for this. They get empowered by this. It's a fundamental game changer. Let me get Pratim Bose into this conversation. Pratim ji, now obviously what are the priority agendas? Because you can say that the administrative issues are also equally impactful. You build a Ram Mandir, it creates jobs, it creates travels. There are more people coming to Ram Mandir today in Ayodhya than come to the Vatican. And think about the economy boost over there, and the people still haven't voted for the BJP to win. So there are things that indirectly impact the economy, or should we not worry about all these and just focus on investment?
Regarding the first part about Ram Mandir and the loss in Ajodhya or whatever, I think it is okay. It has happened. We didn't expect it, but then we must not equate it, because India is a transitional society and the voting patterns, there are very distinct things. So people who are benefited might not have voted in favor. So there are issues there. I mean, let us not get out. Let us get out of that for the moment. What we must understand is that the recreation of brand India or brand Bharat was very important for our revival. We are a civilizational nation, and we should have that pride in us to make ourselves, to be developed country. That is essential. Let us look at around the world, and it has been there. So back to the topic, if we look at Ram Mandir, it's the creation of the religious circuit, etc. It was not merely Ram Mandir. If we look at the Buddhist circuit, everything has been revamped, and there will be a huge contribution to the economy. But for the moment, I think for the government, the very thing that it has to take is a couple of things. Modi 2.0 has placed India in the global map. The prominence of India has increased, and that has invited many impacts. Please understand this. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible. So here, our first task is to improve our economics, has to be our first priority. So semiconductor, there is a microchip war between US and China. We have to reap the harvest. We have to attract Taiwanese investment. This is a priority. Second is we have to have high FDIs. This is a priority. We need to turn the wheel very fast. Trade is a priority. We have to increase our exports. Increasing GDP to become third largest economy is a priority. So these things, India has to be far more active.
But this is the irony of India, okay? And this is, ladies and gentlemen, the issues are there globally. The biggest issue in San Francisco right now is sanitation. Okay, believe it or not. Okay, one of the richest cities. I mean, millionaires by the mile, billionaires by the mile. Okay, so let me get Professor Nalapath here. Professor Nalapath, how do we then do both? Because then the irony is always an issue that in a place where you're still building toilets and public hygiene is a fundamental concern, at the same time you need to build the semiconductor plants and send your mission to the moon, all of which have to happen simultaneously. Is not an easy task ahead.
Rishabh, what has happened under Modi 2.0? You are seeing the digital economy spread. You are seeing the unified payments interface and various other digital systems get used by hundreds of millions of people. You are seeing hundreds of millions of new bank accounts. So this is actually happening. There is no disconnect between technology and, if I may say so, the development of the poor. The problem is when a few technology companies try to become monopolistic and try to dominate the price and raise prices. In the United States, you've got these, trust busters. Citizens' anger results in the breakup of large tech companies. We have to ensure that any effort at creating a monopoly, which basically bars or makes difficult competition, has to be stopped. And that is where Modi's concept of Startup India is very important. These people who are young people who are going in for startups, we need to build the next NVIDIA. We need to build the next Microsoft, the next Google in India. And that is happening. And I do believe it's going to get a very powerful impetus during Modi 3.0.
Okay, so let me take a low-hanging fruit. And we are not having an expert discussion here, but we are having an educated one for sure. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, India is literally compounding its solar capacity on an annual basis. Compound growth is taking place where every couple of years we are doubling our solar capacity. We are already pretty much well entrenched as the second largest solar producer in the world, the largest now being China. Let me get Dr. Bagai on this. Dr. Bagai, now I want you people watching the broadcast just to have just in your mind's eye, in your imagination, I want you to think of the union budget and think what are the two biggest expenditures? It's not health, it's not education, it's oil and it's defense. Okay. Now, can you imagine that if your two biggest expenditures became net income providers? All right. If you can make in defense and sell abroad and earn hundreds of millions of dollars, if you can produce solar energy and sell it to Bhutan and Bangladesh and Nepal and sell it for millions of dollars. Dr. Bagai, these fundamental pivot points, do you see us nearing them, or are these all hopeless dreams of the imagination?
No, I think it's something which India is going on the right track. Just to take you back just for 10 seconds, it's extremely important. Me being from a family of the original migrants post-partition, I would make the statement that India has gone through 4 phases. The first phase was of mere survival, the first 20 years. The second 20 years of our journey in the last 75, 76 years was to build a life. Then came life to lifestyle. And now Indians have become aspirational and inspirational. So I don't want anyone now in the political system across board of all political parties to keep talking about what Nehru did or what Panditji did or what anyone else did. That era was different. We now need to focus on where we are and we need to look forward. India is going to be defined by 2 major issues. One is going to be climate control and climate change. 2 is going to be alternative energy. We have to put our resources, energy as our thought process, intellect, technology, research towards finding alternative forms of energy which are sustainable and scalable, cost effective. We can't rely on oil or we'll run dry. If we keep importing it, we will run dry financially in any case. Coming to the climate part, what we are seeing now in Delhi or in northern India of temperatures reaching 50 or sudden storms, sudden climate changes, we have to focus, and India is capable of taking a lead globally. We have to work towards carbon negative or carbon neutral environment. We have to look at preserving our greens. These are extremely important points, and I'm absolutely sure Mr. Modi would have this on his radar.
Okay.
But having said that, I don't want any political party, as a citizen of India, to be focusing on what happened in the past.
Okay, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's my if you ask my father's generation, they will tell you at a time where India could not feed itself, where you got PL 480 rotis to eat, which were red in color because the poor quality wheat the Americans were dumping on you. That when you had to stand in line to get milk in the biggest cities, including the national capital. And yes, it was a different generation fighting a completely different battle, a country that could not feed itself. We are a country now that produces surplus grain, so much grain that it rots in the system, that it's better to give it away to the poor people, which is what Narendra Modi is doing, than let it rot in some godown somewhere as being wasted. But ladies and gentlemen, let me get Professor Nalapat on this, because this is a fundamental example. Professor Nalapat, that point of difference from very slow, incremental, chipping away growth to exponential growth. Let me read some statistics to you. India in the last quarter installed 10 gigawatts of solar capacity. Compared that to 1 year ago, in which we in one quarter installed 2 gigawatts, that's a 400% increase in the speed of acceleration. It is a 500% increase as opposed to 2 years ago. Within 2 years, we are not going to increase our solar capacity, we are going to double it. Double it means that from around about 10 or 12% of solar being your energy mix, it's going to be near 35%. 1/3 of India's power is suddenly going to come from solar. Incremental growth to compounded exponential growth. Are we there in some places now, sir?
Rishabh, the strategy of many countries, I'm talking of South Korea, I'm talking of Japan, I'm talking of United States, I'm talking of China, is to grow national champions. And we have to be very cautious. Now you're talking about the amount of foreign exchange we are spending. A lot of that foreign exchange goes to one particular country. That is basically, because of the rules that are there regarding pricing and items like that. I mean, they are trying to flood world markets. Now take, for example, electric vehicles. EVs are going to be the future. Chips and batteries are going to be basically the heart of the EV industry. And chips now, the Prime Minister is making a very strong effort to get hold of Taiwanese companies. They are coming and more will come. There's no question about it. But now regarding batteries, Still, China has got a lock on that, which India can definitely overcome with the Prime Minister and his team's energy and enthusiasm. Now, so that is the point. EVs, instead of allowing a flood from China, ensure that your own domestic champions do better.
Yeah.
And make sure about that. The same regarding army. You're talking about pensions. You're quite right. Pensions are taking up more than 60% of the total defense budget, actually 70% and more. We have only 30% or less for actual equipment and other things. The pensions are taking up such a, and salaries.
Pension salaries, correct.
So the point is, that's where Agnipath comes in. It's a revolutionary scheme. It's designed to train youngsters and reduce the pension load. And I do hope that political parties will not view these in a political way, just because Narendra Modi said.
No, change is not. But this is the problem, and let me address this problem with Dr. Bagai before I get Mr. Bose back in. Dr. Bagai, there is a larger problem because the largest employer in India is still the Indian Armed Forces. It's still the railways. It's still the state and government put together. It is still the PSUs. Okay. Then you get the Tatas and others who come in as large employers with lakhs of employees. But for a bunch of people who are willing to sacrifice years of their life with their only aspiration of getting a government job, you heard the story of MS Dhoni, whose family was telling him, you've become a ticket collector. I mean, don't give up on that for some cricketing dream, because it's gold, it's a settled job. For a lot of people, that is still an issue.
Yeah, I think people who join, irrespective of defense or any other sector, a government job, I think the government jobs should be appraised. So it is not a passport to luxury till you retire and then live off pension. So I think government jobs also must have an appraisal system every 5 years. If you're not performing and not meeting your requirements as far as your job description and deliverables are concerned, you can't take your job for granted. But one more point I want to add in the overall scenario of India progressing forward, there must be a separate department now, and I wish and pray Mr. Modi does it, is to address mental health. This is something which is affecting everyone, including teenagers, young adults, even seniors, people who've lost the near and dear ones, post-COVID especially. I think mental health needs more center stage and addressal.
Okay, point well noted. But let me get Pratim Bose ji on the original premise. Pratim ji, because obviously all this economic dream comes to naught if it is not job creating growth. Jobless growth means nothing to you and me and to our families. Okay, so in a position where the government job is still the dream goal, here we are 80 years later. How many families, how many next generation of youth, maybe younger than us, half our age, are still being driven by the government job? How do we create the jobs at the rate they're required?
So let us. The only logical answer to this is to enhance economic activity. That is the only logical answer. And when I say economic activity, let me give you an example. It is, say, for example, manufacturing. Now, to us, we look at industry very, in a very impractical way. The pens, the 5 rupees or 10 rupees, from 5 rupees, 10 rupees pens to keychains to so many things. If you look at the import profile, you will see we import a whole lot of things which are low tech, which can be manufactured.
Agarbatti was one of them.
Yeah, there are too many things. So the point is, your economic activity has to be increased, and that will create jobs. We have to separate the employment discussion from the employment, quote unquote, permanent jobs and all these things. We have to dissociate.
Okay, but what do we do? Mr. Bose, let's look at electronics. Okay, so let me not even look at the agarbattis. Let me look at electronics. Electronics, ladies and gentlemen, everything that you are watching this telecast on has a chipset, has a screen, probably has a battery. Those are the three principal components. The rest of it is just a bit of plastic. Okay, so we don't make the screens, we don't make the batteries, we don't make the chipsets. So when you want your cheap phone, cheap TV, because the consumers want a cheap phone, cheap TV, but at the same time you want to build your own. This is a perpetual economic conundrum, Pratim Bose. It applies to the solar industry because you want the company setting up the solar park to have the cheapest possible photovoltaic panels. But in order to build them, you need R&D and companies to set up. Then the Chinese panels are cheaper. You're forever stuck in this rut. How do we break out of it?
That is the opportunity that we have, the 5-6 years window that we are enjoying. So the Modi 3.0 doesn't have time to, you have rightly said, every time is different. And we are at the thick of opportunity. We have to translate them into possibilities. So at this moment, if you see the very issues, if you may remember in 2016, the WTO has turned down India's clause of domestic manufacturing, okay, of solar panels. But today, you see that world WTO tariff regime is being challenged from everywhere by every country.
Yeah.
So you have the opportunity today in 5 years to build those critical mass and bring down your costs. So that is why you are building your infrastructure. China is not merely about subsidizing manufacturing. They also have.
Okay, so let me crystallize it back to my original question, and let me get Professor Nalapat back in. Professor Nalapat, the original question was that there was a point of thinking that once we come to government, we want to improve things. So if we improved it by 2 or 3%, if there were 1,000 water taps and we made it 1,100 water taps, well, we did our job, right? It wasn't that if 1 lakh water taps are required, we will build 99,000 of them. So for example, solar, we are looking at 1 crore rooftop solar. Okay, that means pretty much 10 to 20% of India's households, which are in urban centers, have a solar photovoltaic panel on their roof. It's not an incremental change, it's a complete sweeping sea change. How do we make that the norm? That is like we've seen with UPI, like we've seen with mobile phone data rates, that is something fundamental changes.
Economist has basically said, we are at the cusp of fantastic opportunity. You have got this China plus one concept. And many people are saying India is the only plus one because we are the largest manpower in the world. And believe me, whatever you can say about education system, you do about 6 months or 1 year of on-the-job training, and that should be integrated into company recruitment, then our people are better than almost anybody else, probably anybody else. So we are now at the cusp of a great opportunity. And that opportunity is to go forward to 10%, 12%, 15% growth. And when that happens, I can assure you, it's going to happen in a form that involves hundreds of millions of people. So it's important, therefore, to reskill them, to de-skill some skills, reskill them, and at the same time, Rishabh, is important, keep our handicrafts going, because the handicrafts will have a tremendous export market.
Yeah.
You have Indian handicrafts. They are sold for absurd prices when you go to Europe and the United States. But they're all sold by third parties. They buy them in bulk at cheap rates and then they sell them there. And we should have that kind of infrastructure. And I can tell you now, for example, China. The Chinese are flooding handicrafts into India. I mean, they have no business doing that at all. And we have to be very, very watchful of that kind of smuggling in. We have to make sure that smuggling is controlled, because smuggling is one of the biggest disasters of local manufacturing.
Okay, but how much of that now requires?
I'm very confident the Prime Minister will do this.
Yeah, but
I'm sure the Prime Minister, he wanted to ensure, no, I'll tell you, Rishabh.
Yes, please.
He wanted to ensure everybody knew the benefits of a modern economy, of a 21st century economy. That's exactly what he was talking about. And move away from this 20th century economy. And now that has happened. Because of the spread of new technologies, everybody knows the value. And now he's going to fine-tune that in such a way that the people, that workers, Indian manpower, Indian youth power is going to be...
Okay, but how much of this requires when you create an ecosystem? And I mentioned the ecosystem in electric vehicles, right? You have to the primary component of the electric vehicle is the battery. The primary component of the battery is the lithium. So if you want to have an ecosystem, first you need to find the lithium. It is but obvious that a large part of Ladakh is in the same area where China is getting all its lithium for, and they have the 90%. These arid mountainous regions are where in South America, in Peru and Chile, lithium is found. So very likely you have massive reserves of lithium. Then you have to get past the environmental concerns of exploiting the reserves. But an ecosystem approach. So let me get Pratim Bose before I get Dr. Bagai into this. Pratim Bose, let's look at the other ecosystem, which is currently for you and me. When we pick up the mobile phone, the hardware isn't manufactured in India. The either Android or Apple ecosystem that you are utilizing is not owned by an Indian company. So we piggyback everything, and all of these people can one day decide that we don't like your policies. An entire major company is running with tens of thousands of crores of market cap, and they can simply switch them off because we don't have the ecosystem. So do we need government to come and say, hey, you excuse me, you entrepreneur, you need to make the Indian replacement for Android? Or do we simply hope that private industry does it?
See, let me first start with the example of how India built an auto industry that started in the 1980s. The industry that was before that was simply the foreign companies, okay, which went away after the partition, after the independence, and their Indian counterparts remained. And it was all low technology. But you are very right in your point about the ecosystem. We didn't have any ecosystem back in the 1980s when these Maruti Khataras used to come out. Okay, it was a poor technology. You may remember Suzuki was known for manufacturing two-wheelers. It was never known as a car company. It is India, from India, they became a car company. So right at this moment, we have a sprawling ecosystem in automobiles. No company, any company can come and go, but we will be producers of automobiles. The same thing will happen. See, you cannot just avoid inviting Apple. One Apple has brought you the attention factor. That is so important in building the ecosystem. Now the whole industry have to enter. Without getting into the nitty-gritties of, say, mobile phone or EVs, you have rightly pointed out about the batteries, about lithiums and etc. I know, that is a different occasion. If you invite me, we can talk. But for the moment, let us see what is happening. The big ticket things came. You may be aware that private research centers have just started coming in. This was a big wanting task because Indian corporates had been very low on R&D. So this has just been started.
Yeah, but Pratimji, my question was, I'll give you the difference example, okay? If you want to do the cutting edge of R&D in terms of science, all right, you want to then have the nuclear fusion test reactor, you want to have the gravitational wave sensor, you want to build the CERN experiment because that gets you the best talent, okay? That requires other than private sector investment. The semiconductor plants, which are going to be tens of thousands of crores, requires other than private sector investment, but the private sector also plays a role. So it was a Jamshedji Tata who had to decide that how is it that in a country like India, which built the iron pillar, can't even make the sewer ki pipe. Something has gone wrong. So let me get the technology. He went to the British, they laughed at him. He went to the Americans, they laughed at him. So finally, he ended up going to Japan, when he, of course, famously met Vivekananda on that ship. And what he built was the largest steel foundry in all of Asia. Okay? One fundamental pivot happened. Now, today, if you said Jamshedji Tata, you'll say top 1%, we hate these entrepreneurs, okay, they are looting the country. But he pivoted something. So a pivot point, Pratim Bose, happened, where suddenly the largest steel foundry in Asia was in India. Do we need those pivot points, or is incremental change good enough?
Pivot points are obviously required, but the point is, what will be the pivot point? Say semiconductors. Rajiv Gandhi took interest in this, and a semiconductor plant came up.
Correct.
But the next 30 years, no one paid attention to it. It was this whole. So that was the proper scheme. Proper intervention into the system, but who paid attention to? Now you cannot make up for those lost time.
Yeah,
you have to take an approach which fits today's context, today's situation, and you have to do it very fast. The problem is, as you have said, we have to do everything at one go. That was not the case in case of China when they got into Barbie-doll economics and all these things.
But the everything in one go is also the exponential economic opportunity.
Right.
Because,
Please,
finish your thought, then I'll get Dr. Bagai back in. Finish your thought, yes.
Give me another 30 seconds. We are doing some good job after many years in making India in defense. From this year, entire ammunition will be India made. Now, we could have done that many years ago. Ecosystem doesn't fall from the sky. You have to develop it. So we are slowly over there. Some movement have started where you are leaving it to the private sector. And the private sector will come up very fast. Now, the next job is to restructure. We have just restructured OFPs on paper, but these need to be revamped. These are old archaic stuff. They churn out archaic stuff. This needs to be revamped.
So defense is one. I mean, and space is something we don't really need to discuss, but a massive dramatic change has happened in the past 1 year. If you watch NewsX, you know it for sure, because we've been discussing it. Most people don't. It's going to be $100 billion economy right out of India. Okay. Forget the world in the next 5 to 10 years. So if you're coming out of college, that's where you want to be. But let me then put that point with Dr. Bagai. Dr. Bagai, we see a lot of cutting edge experimental surgery, for example, happening now in India. But are we seeing the cutting edge machines being made here? Do the best MRI machines, do the best Doppler machines, do the best, robot surgical instruments, are they being made, designed here in India?
You're doing mind reading, because this was the point which I wanted to highlight. So I'll give you some 5 classical examples. And before I say that, India must put these verticals in what I call as mission brand mode. Now we need to not only create an ecosystem, but we need to build a brand around it. Now I'll give you 5 very, very quickly examples. The commonest things, and all of us have been buying it and we are overpaying for it. A luxury segment car can be made in India. There is no need to be vying for Mercedes and BMWs, which are costing crores of money, which is much more than what the actual costing and the profit margins are. Shoes. Why should we focus on Nike and Adidas? Aircrafts. India has the capacity to build what Boeing and Airbus is doing. MRI and CTs you mentioned. Why are we focusing on GE, Philips, Toshiba and Siemens? We have the capacity here. An MRI in India costs anywhere between 10 to 12,000 rupees. The same cost to the patient will reduce to 2,000, 2,500 if we make the machines here. The landing cost of an MRI 3 Tesla machine in 2024 is 14 crores plus. The interest kills you. The maintenance of the machine kills you. We need to start putting each vertical as a mission brand and focus around it. Build an environment. We have the technology. We do have the resources. We have the intellect and talent. What we need to do
so no offense. I'm going to cut through the chase, ladies and gentlemen. You are going to have to find, like you did, a Nandan Nilekani and say, okay, buddy, we are backing you. You go set up Aadhaar. All right? Okay, now you've set up Aadhaar, we are backing you. Now go set up this GST website, which had a lot of problems, remember, when it set up. Okay? So yes, you are going to have to pick up some of these people. And yes, some of them are going to be very rich people. They're very rich. Maybe some of them are because they're very accomplished. Okay. Now the bottom line is the elections are over. Politics will continue. We need to get on with it. We are losing, every minute counts. We are losing time in what is a very precious 20 years where we either make it or break it as a GDP that develops into a developed country status. Ladies and gentlemen, the opportunities don't come often. They come maybe once or twice in history. India is returning to where it was at the pivot point of the world's culture, its affairs, as well as its economics. For the demographic dividend to actually deal returns and not be a demographic disaster, we have to get everything right very rapidly. So let's get on with it, which is why we're having the conversation. I'm hoping a part of it is going to help us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.